Hello, I'm Kochanski, Wilderness Living Skills and Survival Instructor. Considerable years. Today we're going to present an informative article on an item of clothing we call a scarf. For those of you that will want to find more knowledge, for example, we have a series of booklets, and one booklet here is called Survival Kit Ideas. And in the back we go to a little bit of detail on the conceptualization of the scarf in the sense of a multi-use item. You might say this scarf is the Swiss Army knife of clothing situation. While we're talking about it, we have a series of booklets, 17 of them at the moment, and they cover all the various diverse topics from how to dress and how to use your map and compass, bear awareness, wild edible plants, survival when it's cold and there is no snow, survival when it's cold and the snow so deep you need snowshoes, and so on. It all started with this book that I published about, I think it's 27 years ago. The situation here is that when I was still a relatively young man, I put together the best knowledge that I was able to derive what was currently available. And the name, now more published under the name Bushcraft, in Northern was dropped, but it's still exactly the same book, except that the title, the cover looks a little different. I also published a second book a short while later, which has been out of print for a long time, but the information that's in these booklets or in this particular book is found in one video. Here it's called folk toys that grandfathers used to make. And while we're talking about videos, you can see that we have quite a few. There's ones on shelter, clothing, knots and rope work, tool use, you name it in that regard. So if you're a visual person who would like to see more in living color, you might say we have this series. Also on the internet as a ebook, beginning the process of producing a lot more information on ebook form. We've got the beginning with this basic safe travel and boreal survival handbook that you can derive off of and read in the ebook format. Now today we're going to look at scarves as an item that you can build so many uses. Here, for example, is one form of the scarf, which looks like this, and it's a little wider than the shoulders. This is a process of evolution that as we keep looking at more features that the scarf can provide us, we begin to change the shape and the style. And for the longest time, I used to say the scarf should be big enough for you to be able to crawl inside it as if it was a bivy sack. But that is a bit small for certain purposes, depending on what you want to do. Here's another version of a scarf that's much wider, which would perhaps be more suitable as a quilt, you might say. So you want something broad enough that when you fill it full of grass, thusly, this is the product of perhaps less than half an hour of harvesting. You have the option here that you can sleep in front of a big fire or find some way to insulate yourself with locally available materials and therefore crawl into this insulation and go to sleep and wake up hours later without having to stoke a fire. We might get around to putting the grass in the bigger scarf so you get an idea of how the scarf fills in. These scarves are usually double. They're like a bag if you push one end into the other, but they have the feature that on the edge, the middle third, you've got a kind of big enough opening that you can enter the interior of the scarf. For example, you might be sleeping with a scarf like this in high mosquito season, and you find that you're going to be the harassment that the mosquitoes would impose on you can be dealt with quite effectively this way. And during the day when the mosquitoes are bad, one end of the scarf may be used to give you the protection without the rest of it being in use. But first and foremost, this is a scarf to be used around the neck. Now you might find that it doesn't take much. Here, for example, is the very first time I encountered the scarf. This is Tom Roycroft made this for me, probably in the mid-60s. The olive drab parachutes were rather rare, and whenever Tom got a hold of one, he would sew it into these scarves, and anytime someone did a favor for him, he would give them a scarf. And Tom had come up with this size, which already had probably a half dozen uses. But basically, if you want something that will wrap your neck sufficiently to give you the equivalent of a medium sweater. If you wrap your neck properly with providing enough coverage in the neck area, you will close off the pumping action from your clothing as you move. You will insulate the neck where the blood vessels are pretty superficial, and so on. And the way I calculate almost that's a feature that's equivalent to at least a medium sweater, but a lot easier to take off and put on. Now, one of the intentions of the scarf was to fill it full of snow, and when it's full of snow, it's hanging near the fire, and then using a plastic bag with 2 sticks in it, this would be hanging over the bag, and without having an extra pot, you're able to produce melt snow and produce the liquid for drinking. Another use right off the bat was as a strainer to remove the debris from melted snow water. The next one was the turban, which you would use generally if you were active during the day, and some people might use their headgear like a toque or whatever in the winter to keep their head warm. Well, that headgear could be wet when you have finally gone to bed. Well, your scarf is converted into a form of turban that will allow you to keep your head warm. So the dimension of the scarf was made so that it fit in with this idea, and then you would have a dry bit of headgear to use inside your sleeping bag. Of course, the other thing is lose your headgear and the sun may be exceedingly hot, so on. The fabric is meant to be used in emergency purposes as a bandage material or material to produce slings for broken or dislocated arm or whatever. So as a result, as you begin to play around with this concept, you discover that the scarf may expand into many uses. In fact, there are so many applications that it's difficult to build all these applications into one scarf, and sometimes you may have as many as 2. Here is one that is on its way to the evolution. So this one here, the width was elbow to elbow, you might say, or close to it, whereas that's not enough to cover yourself properly. Something twice as wide, well, of course it'll be twice as bulky, twice as wide will now cover you much better. The gravity trying to keep the insulation you've derived from the forest in the form of moss or lichens or grass, whereas this is a bit narrow to give you good coverage on the sides. You make a very insulated bed, and then you can fill a scarf full of this material to keep it over you. Ideally, you might have 2. This narrower one would be quite suitable for the one you sleep on, and the broader one will be, of course, where your notion is that your focus is on sleep. It took me many years before I began to consolidate what the important features would be, and this scarf development actually preceded a lot of that. And I have come up with the observation that if you're to put a kit together, a survival kit, that kit should address 2 things. One, how does it help you to sleep that much better that night, or for you to be able to get your comfortable sleep as you may survive days on end. And the other is, how does the component contribute in you being able to meet your water needs. So you have those sort of things, and I would say the focus should first be on supplementing your sleeping gear supplementing your clothing. That's the very first sort of thing here. Well, with a scarf that's this wide, you have no problem in finding insulation to fill the ends, and there's a way without damaging the scarf. Now the assumption is that when you make a scarf, and you have to, you will cut it and destroy it in the process. But if that was full of insulation, back and front, I will have an insulated vest. While we're talking about the vest, if a vest has got one side of it that's fluorescent orange, like we have here, and the other is olive drab or camel, you will have something that you can also incorporate. The soldier might want to become either more visible or less visible, and the scarf would help you to achieve that with a minimum amount of addition to weight to your kit. Now when you've got it's obvious that when you have a scarf that's made like a bag, so this situation is that you having a copious scarf and you shove one end into the other, you will have a double layered bag. And if it's made out of nylon or parachute or something strong, going to Fanny's Fabrics, you're likely to find many things. So if I put this one end into the other, the double bag now, so it could be a container for your gear when it's connected with your Roycroft pack frame. Well, one scarf is used as the container for the gear, and the second scarf is the pack strap. So you find that right off the bat, when you've got a really good item, then generally two is a good idea, because you'll find that you might derive much more convenience with having two rather than just working with one. But the cost is you have something a little bit more heavy to carry. Here we have the example of a fairly large sheet of fabric. Now this could actually be the amount of volume that a scarf that I was talking about being quite big. But here you'll see that this is a very compact way of packaging fabrics by twisting them in a certain way and then winding them up. And just as an example of compactness, we take this one apart, and you'll see that the amount of fabric would make a very generous scarf. And this is a standard type of width of a very strong fabric, which, looking on the internet, you will likely find sources for it quite readily. It is a common type of fabric, so that you're not in the rare situation where things are rare and expensive. You see, we have twisted that into a fairly tight rope, and then when we untwist it, we see that this is a big enough piece of fabric to produce a pretty serious hammock. So if you wanted to build hammocks into the picture, you find that you can have a fairly large sheet like this that could be your shelter tarp, but if it's made into a bag, you now add tons of versatility. The big situation with packing stuff, sometimes bulk is as much of a problem or a greater problem than weight. And so you got to know how to package things into compact bulk. And once we get this here, if this was sewn, which is just a sheet, because I find that there are certain things you never get around to, and sometimes you don't need any other format. But if I was to carry a hammock, you can see the small package that would result in a pretty serious hammock if you know your knots. Of course, you can refer to our videos on knots, our booklets on knots. So there you have a piece of fabric that naturally, sewn one way, gives you a pretty wide. Here's the natural width of this fabric. And if it's folded in half and sewn around the edges. Now this type of fabric also, just to make a bag with one end open. And there are various ploys that you use there. But this piece of fabric is also long enough that should I gather it and tie it with the proper sheet bend and stretch it in the right way between two trees, I have a hammock. Well, I showed you the twisted material to show you how little bulk was involved and what you get for it. And in my range of different scarves, eventually I'll have this sewn into a certain type of bag. Now you can have a scarf that's actually a double bag, and when you turn it inside out or outside in, you've got a two-layered tarp for shedding the rain and things like this. Now here we have many other features that are worked into the scarf. One, as you can see, is the mosquito netting. Here we got a scarf that's made out of material that you might say could be totally mosquito netting, and I think in some cases you'll find fabrics that sufficeth as mosquito nets totally, but they're still strong enough for other purposes. Now this woven stuff, if I tied it tightly and tied it correctly, it would probably act as a hammock as well, but it would be a slightly different hammock from the one with the big fabric. But you have either a panel or the end of your scarf is parachute material, mosquito netting. The mosquito netting that you find that you can see through the best is black. And here we got the circumstance that I actually recently used this because I found that there were a lot of wasps in the shed that I was working in, and the wasps were rather annoyed by my presence. So I got my scarf and I put it on, and every once in a while one bombed me, but this was sufficient to keep me from getting bitten in the face at any rate, this sort of thing. It doesn't take very much fabric to make a substitute for a bathing suit. I mean, Tom's scarf here, which is maybe a handspan almost wide, would still be an acceptable bathing suit in mixed company. Be very sexy with the open sides. So the need to carry a bathing suit or mosquito head nets and scarves are all incorporated into one. This scarf has got tabs. I have scarves, or have had scarves that have these little arrangements of a loop and a tape so that I can tie other things to its edges. So I could take two scarves and tie them together, and you essentially almost create a sleeping bag because they will stay together because they've tied together. And some of these loops can be strategically placed so that the scarf could be perhaps converted into a stretcher much more easily, and so on. Now, the list of things, I think at one time we had a list of at least 40 things that we do with the scarf. First of all, it's a scarf to keep the neck warm that's equal to a medium wool sweater. Second, it's a mosquito head net. Third, it could be a bathing suit. Fourth, it's the means to make quilts and so on to keep insulation where you want it when you're trying to sleep, trying to get around the dynamics of creating a big enough fire to keep you warm, and choosing instead to keep yourself warm with insulation, and not having to work so hard gathering up so much firewood every 24 hours to keep yourself comfortable. The package that this scarf would produce would be very small, and the package that this scarf will produce is somewhat in that dimension. So these things don't take very much room. Now some people might be interested in seeing the way the scarf is wound, so we will set this up. The first thing here is that we often have to almost have a helper is faster, but you often realize that, well, I'll tie it here so I'll be in the camera. But anyway, the situation will be that we Here we tie it in a slippery sheet bend. Again, if you're wanting to learn the knots, we have ample literature. I make a U. The sheet bend is such a marvelous knot in that it will tie to something that isn't a rope. And if it's temporary, that means that I get the benefit of using it. I put the slip and it comes off very easily. And now I can tie this to some part of the and you'll learn that when you twist like this, that you've got to use a method where the string doesn't participate in the twisting. So I'll put probably a clove hitch on there. And there we got an anchor, and the string will wind up. Perhaps if you folded it neatly, it might be even a more compact bundle. You can actually wind this so tightly and so hard that it becomes a blackjack. As one of the uses that here. And we just twist. My string will twist for a short while till it twists up tight. And you can see now the ballooning action you see here might remind us that you could actually have a scarf that's primarily bivy sack. You could have a scarf where your intention is primarily stretcher material. Another scarf which you might choose for it to be more of the quilts. So it depends on what your concerns and what you're paranoid about as to what you end up creating as a focus for that particular scarf, because there are so many ways. Now here we might have it as tight as we can get it, and of course this is one form of a rope. We encounter this idea of a single twist in certain construction, and you might have a colored thread through your material here to show you where this fold will be, to where to start your twisting. And you'll notice now the rope is being made, and that if you pay attention to absolute hardness and firmness, you will get a very compact situation. This can be done with foam as well as fabric, and I've done this with fly sheets from tents as a convenient shelter material. And there are good nylon, I don't think is damaged as a scarf. It leaves this fabric in a crinkly condition initially, as you can see here, that it's the effects of the twisting and the winding has got all these crinkle effect, which probably makes the fabric quite a bit warmer. And as we roll up, we end up working towards the looped end. And if you've calculated everything correctly, then you find that you can press this in. I'm a little long, but you don't need, it'll stay together on account that you can unwind a bit of the rope, and this pulls through and keeps it from being unwound. So it's a compact package in itself. Of course, I'm rusty on this, but I've done it 10 times before the filming. People often complain that I make things look very easy when I'm in the good form. Being an instructor, that's the issue, that if you're well practiced, everything seems easy and goes fast. If you're a learner, it's almost the other way. But anyway, you get a compact bundle, doesn't take much room. You can't get a sweater that's as compact as this. And by the time you pile up the bathing suit, the mosquito head net, and a number of other items, you've got a substantial amount of space and weight, whereas the scarf does the job for each and every thing. Here we have a balloon that is available In the dollar stores, you can pay as much as $5 for a bigger balloon that inflates very large, and you can appreciate that if I start filling this balloon with water, eventually it will burst. But if I put the balloon inside of a scarf or a bag, that will confine the balloon, and it's common that a balloon like this that I will carry, well, I can lift 2 5-gallon pails and carry them, because as a farm boy I had to do that to water the chickens and the pigs and everything. Well, you can easily get 2 5-gallon pailfuls of water in here, which would mean that that much water you probably won't be able to sling it on your shoulders. And of course, if you can find this in your scarf in the right way, then you can backpack that water. And what that means is there are many occasions, not that often perhaps in one's life, but there are many occasions where I found that the water course is way, way down in the valley, and the only place we can camp in the near vicinity is quite high up, and going down there and up there just for a small pot of water, or in fire hazard you fill a fairly substantial amount of water and have it set up near camp so you can tend to control your fire and be sure it doesn't get away on you, etc., etc. So there is a lot of merit to having a means to carry a large quantity of water. Obviously in the desert it would be very handy. The other situation is that when you inflate this, keeping in mind that I read somewhere that essentially displacing the amount of water that a basketball would displace will keep a soldier afloat with all his kit. Water is very heavy, 65 pounds per cubic foot. So a cubic foot of balloon will now hold up 65 pounds of, and so the balloon by itself will act rather weirdly unless it's confined inside of a bag so that it doesn't bulge unexpectedly and that it supports the balloon. At any rate, I am pretty sure you're beginning to realize that you yourself might even discover uses we haven't mentioned. That the notion of having something on you that allows you to make a quilt, to me, is the most astounding part of any survival kit or as a survival kit component.